Okay. Okay, so it is now recording. Welcome everybody. I'm so excited to have y'all here at the back to school webinar for Duchenne. DMD is a rare disease. And as Dr. Truba was saying in one of our previous webinars, Dr. Truba is a child psychologist at Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus. She's got a lot of experience with our kids with Duchenne. You know, she has been illustrating the stressors that these kids feel that a lot of kids without Duchenne don't feel in school. So things from the sensory input, they have a real hard time shutting off that sensory stuff. Things to just the academic demands, writing, simply writing is exhausting and fatiguing for these kids. A lot of emotional dysregulation, and that can make it challenging to learn, plus the delayed executive function by approximately 2 years or so. And then also the peer relations, that's a challenge all in and of itself. So, you know, just to mention a few of the school stuff that these kids are working on a daily basis. I really wanted to reach out and get all of our great minds working together, because our kids with Duchenne do rely on us, the adults in their lives, to try to make the path a little easier for them. They struggle so much. And so I'm excited about us meeting today and talking today to brainstorm ways that we can support them, and also to understand our own limitations. You know, me as a parent, so I homeschool my son. And if anybody wants to talk about homeschooling, I'm happy to do that. But when we were looking at schools, we specifically chose a school that, didn't require homework, because that's something beyond me as a parent with a child with Duchenne that I can manage gracefully every night. And I knew that was just going to increase the stress levels in our household. So, you know, the educators, the therapists, understanding what the parents can manage gracefully, and then also, you know, understanding what the school is able to manage gracefully as well. So, you know, the goals of the school, they don't always have as much input or as much say about the peer relations as our parents would like to have. So just really, I want to get really clear on what each of us can do. So again, we can brainstorm together and figure out how to help these kids. A part of this, first and foremost, is knowing what Duchenne is. I mean, I'm, a parent of a child with Duchenne. 6 years he's been diagnosed, and I'm still learning. I can only imagine for educators and therapists, you know, when y'all are juggling hundreds of other kids, you know, to have the time and the energy and the effort to learn about Duchenne. What is it? And so I know that can be challenging. We're not going to cover the sciencey stuff of that today. There are plenty of great resources online between Cure Duchenne and PPMD. And what I've done to help facilitate these conversations, because hopefully they'll be ongoing throughout the school years to come, I've set up a Facebook group called Family, Friends, and Duchenne. And it's educators, therapists, and parents. I've got a lot of those resources from our big name nonprofits in there under the files section. I also post information from our webinars about the psychosocial aspect. So there's lots of information, lots of different layers of the disease, and I've got all of that in one place for y'all. So I invite you to join that, and I'll plop that link in the excuse me, in the chat in a second. We also have our YouTube channel. There's lots of great info out there. So that's going to be a way to kind of speed you up and get everybody on the same page. So yeah, beyond that, for this webinar, I just really, like I said, want to get us together, lay out some information, and then start brainstorming how we can support these kids. It is going to be casual. We have designed this so that people can jump in with questions as they need to. We're going to be covering so many different topics that might get lost if you don't tackle it right away. And then lastly, who am I? Who are we? I'm Lindy. I'm Lindy Filis. My son has Duchenne muscular dystrophy. He's 10 years old. And I started up this, community organization called Family, Friends, and Duchenne, so that we could really focus on the way that the disease affects our relationships. So first and foremost, education about Duchenne, and then how we can include individuals with Duchenne in our lives, because there are some differences about them that not everybody knows how to manage or approach or support. And then in addition to that, Family, Friends, and Duchenne educates about how the Duchenne diagnosis affects all of us and our relationships, because it does, as a progressive terminal disease, and how we can support each other. So that's what we're about. Thank you to Filis Law Firm, Leona Filis, for sponsoring Family, Friends, and Duchenne. Thank you, Leona. And also thank you to Sarah McMahan and Doug Levine for being the behind the scenes brainstormers with me. I am ever so grateful. So I just want to start off. We're going to have each of the panelists introduce themselves. So let's see if we can get Leona up first.
Hi everyone, I'm Leona Filis with the Filis Law Firm, and we focus on helping families with children with special needs. I have a child, Jonathan, who's 13, and he's on the autism spectrum, and he kind of inspired me to change my law firm to focus on laws and rights that affect parents with kids with special needs. I'm also an aunt of a wonderful child with Duchenne. So that's me.
Thank you so much. Bridgette?
Hi, everybody. I'm Bridgette McMahan. I'm a licensed specialist in school psychology. And then my background in all of this is my parents own a small business for physical, occupational, and speech therapy. And I've attended some like Duchenne events and all of that. So, and then my mother is Sarah McMahan. So I was asked to kind of come on as somebody who is in the special education world in the public school system.
And I am so grateful that you're here and that Doug is here also, because I don't want this to be a unilateral complaining about the school thing. I'm really grateful that you and Doug both kind of bridge understanding both worlds so that we can come together. So I'm so grateful for your expertise. Thank you, Bridgette. And let's see, Doug.
Yes, hi everybody. I'm a physical therapist in Austin, Texas. And like Lindy said, I kind of straddle both systems. Where I feel like I can be most helpful for you guys is really my background, because currently, well, I've worked with kids with Duchenne for a long time, for about 20 years, but I've worked in many different environments. Currently, I see kids in the home 3 days a week, and I come out to them, do physical therapy. And then I'm also a school therapist 2 days a week. So I definitely see things on both sides of the fence, and I hear things. And if there's complaints about school stuff, you're not going to offend me today. That's all right. I'm here to learn as well. And I don't know everything by any means. So hopefully having those different backgrounds and different environments that I work in will help me to be able to give you guys good information.
Thank you so much, Doug. All right, let's get started. Leona, are you going to be sharing your screen to begin with?
Hey everyone, I'm really happy to join join Bridgette and Doug and Lindy on this topic about going back to school and what it means to our kids and our parents. There's a lot of different emotions that are involved when you're going back to school, and you want to make sure that your child is receiving all the different support and services that they need to be able to do well at school. So there's some laws that are in place for special education, and also something called Section 504. So when I first had my son's diagnosis, I did not realize he could go to school before kindergarten. There is a federal mandate, which is called child find. And school districts are supposed to advertise and get out the word that services at the public school are available to children even as young as 3 years old. This is all because of a network of laws, but the main law that helps a lot of our parents is called IDEA, which is Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act. So the school districts are supposed to identify any residents in their area where the children need special education, and they're supposed to evaluate them for free. It's not just educational services that will be provided. There's also related services, which I think is a real key component to what our kids will be needing. But if you haven't had anyone come to you, then take it upon yourself as the parent to be your child's advocate and go ahead and contact your local school and request an evaluation. So for my child, I was able to get him enrolled in something called ppcd. And this particular program allows children to go part-time to school and receive some educational services, but also for my child, for example, he also receives speech therapy. So it's able to start him slowly in the process of going to school and getting acclimated, meeting with teachers, and just, I guess, trying to start finding out what all is involved educating my child who has challenges. But a lot of people, well, okay, so one thing you're going to learn about special education is that there's lots of acronyms. So IDEA was one of our acronyms, but another one that people will recite over and over again, especially in their meetings at school, is FAPE. So FAPE is free, appropriate public education. And that's the standard that we have for trying to determine what is best suited for our children so that they can learn best in a school setting. So free, it should be obvious kind of what that means to you. It's free education at school, public school. Appropriate is where we probably have the most problems for parents with children with special needs when they're trying to negotiate with the school district as to the services that can be provided to their children to help them with their education and meeting their goals. What we do when we have a child who is found through the child find mandate and has been evaluated, we'll have something called an IEP, which is the Individualized Education Plan. Now, this plan is developed by a diagnostician, by professionals at the school, including teachers and the parents. Everyone's supposed to work together in what's called an ARD meeting. ARD stands for Admission, Review, and Dismissal. And you'll have these meetings at least once a year at school. At your ARD meeting, you're going to go over terms for your child's education plan. So in FAPE, when we're talking about what's appropriate, it's what's appropriate for your child. What is it that the school district can do to assist your child to have them at the same level at learning right alongside another child in the school district? One tip that I give parents is prior to going to an ARD meeting, go ahead and create something called an IEP binder. What I suggest you do is you go ahead and print up your child's medical reports from your doctors and your therapist and have them placed in your binder to help detail and give explanations to the other members at the ARD meeting as to why you're asking for certain accommodations to help your child receive a better education. That is important. Also, any previous reports that you have from the school. Let's say your child's been in school for a couple of years and you have the daily reports from the teacher, which would identify hopefully when your child's having a good day, when they're having a bad day, what may have set off that bad day. You'd have it memorialized in the daily sheets that you get from school. And so if you have all these documents in one spot in an IEP binder, tagged and labeled, then you can hopefully get the best out of your ARD meeting so that everyone can come together at the ARD meeting and have a successful meeting, but also have a good idea of what needs to be in the IEP so that your child can reach their educational goals. I think Doug's going to talk to us a little bit later about some of the related services. But what you're able to start receiving for your child when they get qualified for special education services would include related services. This would include physical therapy and occupational therapy, speech and language pathology. So there's a lot of benefits to getting your child evaluated. And the earlier that you can get your child evaluated, the better off it is for your child, and from what I've seen, because you're addressing some of these challenges at an early stage, and seeing what services will actually help, and then eliminating what attempts or strategies didn't help your child whenever they're at school and having an issue with receiving educational instruction. This month we celebrated the 31st year anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Within that act, we get something called Section 504, which is another special education type law. So for some people, their children are not automatically eligible for special education. Just because you have a certain diagnosis like Duchenne muscular dystrophy doesn't mean that you automatically get those special education services. But you may be, your child may be eligible to receive special accommodations at school under something called Section 504. So if their child has a physical impairment that limits one or more of their major life activities, and then you can prove that this is actually something that's occurring, that it is an impairment, then you can get special accommodations in school. So for example, if your child is having difficulties carrying their books, you can ask for a special accommodation to have 2 sets of books, one at their classroom and maybe one at the home, so that you can make it easier for them to stay at the same level as the other children in school, so that they have the opportunity to receive a good education. So going back to how we get this started, there's a lot of information about the testing and the evaluations, and I was going to go ahead and turn this over to Bridgette.
All right.
Let's see, before we do that, Leona, I've got a quick question for you. Can you hear me okay? Okay, so I remember way back when, and we thought my son just had Becker's when he was about 3 or 4 years old. How do we communicate with the local school district that our son or our child might be eligible for a preschool age program?
Okay, so One of the things that I learned was sometimes the ARD committee won't, school district won't look at outside evaluations or reports. They have a duty to do their own examination, their own assessment after observing the child and running their own test. It's not just the disability. If it's a physical disability, there also has to be another component typically where you're demonstrating to the school district that there's a need because something is impairing their ability to learn. And so I would first make the request for an examination. And then when you start talking to the diagnostician and the other professionals, you have your IEP binder and you have your medical reports ready to share.
Excellent. Okay. All right, great. So Leona's all done with the legal part. Let's jump in with Bridgette. And I'm going to unspotlight Leona.
All right, is that showing up?
Yes, it is. That looks great.
Okay. All right, so just to reintroduce myself, my name is Bridgette McMahan. I'm a licensed specialist in school psychology. So I am essentially in the school district I work for, I am an evaluator. And I evaluate all of the, well, most of the disability categories. When I show you all 13 of them, some of them do require some, we have audiology specialists and all different types of specialties. But in every school district, you're going to have people like myself, the licensed specialist in school psychologies or school psychologists, for those who hold PhDs in this, and then in Texas, and then diagnosticians. So both evaluators, there's just, for Duchenne's in particular, you will probably start with a diagnostician just because they do most of the cognitive and achievement testing. But there's also a fair likelihood that you could get somebody also in my position. So we do very similar things. As far as special education, if you're just starting out in the special education world, there's a lot of acronyms. And whenever I do just introduction, notice, and consent with parents for initial evaluations, I find myself talking in kind of the special education jargon. And I know we had a specific class in school and we had to fill out, they called it the SPED alphabet soup, which was just every single acronym you could possibly think of. So the ones that I have here on the screen are the main ones. Those are kind of like the most important ones. They get thrown around quite a bit. ARD, admission review dismissal, ECI, early childhood intervention. Leona just talked about FAPE, and FAPE gets thrown around in every single meeting. You ask, is this FAPE? FERPA is the Privacy Act. It's basically the school's equivalent to HIPAA, the Health Privacy Act. And then for anybody who's not in Texas, they don't use ARD, I believe, in any other state. Texas is pretty different in that case, but IEP is the same thing. We still develop IEPs, individualized education plans. So IEP and ARD are kind of interchangeable, just depending on what you're talking about. Least restrictive environment, and they'll say LRE, is this LRE? And there's always a question when you're going through ARDs and when you're talking about placements, where your child is going to be educated. They ask, is this the least restrictive environment? Basically, like, are we educating your child to the maximum extent appropriate that they could be educated with their general education peers? So that's the main goal, is to make sure that any child with a disability is educated with all children. Other health impairment, I added this one because I know that this is one of the eligibilities that Duchenne's could fall under, because Duchenne as a standalone is not a special education category. You don't qualify for special education under Duchenne's, but you would qualify for it under other health impairment. So I'll go into that in a second. And then ppcd, the preschool program for children with disabilities. So these are all of the special education eligibilities. I typically deal with 5 of these on a regular basis. Autism is probably a top one. Emotional disturbance, intellectual disability, other health impairment. I do a lot of work with ADHD for other health impairment, but other health impairment can cover epilepsy, it can cover sickle cell anemia, and it can cover Duchenne's. And then specific learning disability. So that has to do with the cognitive achievement. Do they have a reading disability, math disability, anything like that? And then speech impairment is a standalone special education eligibility. So your child can qualify for special education with just a speech impairment. So it's a little bit different than PT and OT, because with getting PT and OT through the schools, you need to qualify in one of these areas to get physical and occupational therapy as a related service, whereas speech, you can get it just as a standalone. So then jumping back a little bit, just kind of from the beginning, if you're just getting started in, you have a 3-year-old, or even you have a child who is in the ECI program, that is actually really beneficial if your child is in ECI, because then there is, we call it in the school system a 3 is 3 law, meaning that we need to have spoken with ECI, set up a meeting, evaluated that child, and held an ARD meeting regarding the plan for this child on or before their 3rd birthday. So basically the law is to ensure that once ECI no longer covers them when they turn 3, the school district picks them up. So these are a surefire way to kind of have that really smooth transition into the school district. That's not saying that they would automatically qualify for services or ppcd, but they do get an evaluation. And if your child is 3, you can do a parent request also. You can do it before 3, but parent requests, they still follow the 45-day timelines, which I'll go over in a little bit, the special education timelines for evaluation and all of that. But that's also part of Child Find. You send a request into the special education department of your school district. And even if if you're not sending your child to school, if you're sending your child to private school, if you're homeschooling your child, you have a right to an evaluation through the public school system, no matter what. So then I wanted to go into just a little bit of the differences between Section 504 and special education, because there's a lot of overlap, but then there's also some pretty distinct differences. So Section 504 is much more broad. It's a very broad law. It's for anybody with a disability. And really, even in the schools, they like to have documentation, but you just have to kind of show that they have some type of disability that they need accommodations for. And accommodations can be just things that kind of level their environment a little bit. They can be really simple types of things like highlighters or, small group testing, things like that. And the benefit of 504 is that can follow you into college. You get 504 accommodations. You can get that once you move out of high school into college. Special education ends when you graduate or when you age out. So that is a benefit of 504. And then also what I like to tell parents is if you qualify for special education, you're getting everything you would get in 504. But qualifying in 504 doesn't mean you're getting special education. So it doesn't, I hope that makes sense. special education is just very more specific. You have a lot more legal protections, but you also have a lot more hoops to jump through. And I know, you already put the 504 thing on here, so I'll just roll through that real quick. And also, this is the IDEA law, just saying you need to qualify as a student with a disability. And then how do we answer which one of those is right? Which one should you go for, 504 or special education? So both of them, it's very individualized. It really just depends on how your child is doing at that time, and what their needs are. So the two questions you have to answer by law to qualify for special education is, does my child have a qualifying disability? So if your child has anything, if your child has Duchenne's, they have a qualifying disability. The next question is where it can get into tricky water, because does that disability affect my child's educational progress? And educational progress is very broad. And depending on who you talk to, it's defined in different ways. But overall, educational progress is not just, are they making A's? It's also, are they behaviorally where they need to be with their peers? Are they socially where they need to be with their peers? Because the whole educational environment, one of the reasons for LRE, that least restrictive environment, is so that they can get those same social skills, so that they can get peer modeling. So if you have a child with behavioral difficulties and social difficulties, even if they're the brightest kid in the room, you can still receive special education services. And I do think that's important, because a lot of times, schools in particular, just because it is so, a lot of things are so standardized and they're so performance based. It's like, well, they're making A's, so why would you want them in special education? So the behavioral and social part of it is kind of where the parent advocacy comes in, which is like, no, my child doesn't have friends. My child is not communicating with his peers. He's going to school and he dreads it every day, and he's behind socially. He's not where he should be. He's not behaving in a way that you would expect a child of his age to behave. So those are all things that you can kind of bring up to the school. Like, these are what we can work on. He has a qualifying disability that explains why he's having these problems, and this is how we can address it. So, and then again, how to answer that second question. The first one, because that's what the school's going to say. Are they making progress in their curriculum? If not, that's kind of an easy, the school wants you to do it too. So there's less pushback. Do they need their instruction modified? And is their education being affected even with accommodations? So even if you give them a highlighter, even if you chunk assignments into smaller portions, are they still not where they need to be? Even if you put them in peer groups, even if you give them, pull out or small group, like little social skills things, are they still struggling? So if those answers are all yes, and they're not where they need to be, they're not typical in their school environment, then that's a case for special education.
Bridgette, real quick before you move on, could you go back to the previous slide?
This one?
Yeah. So how do you define making progress?
So much like everything in special education, it's intentionally vague.
Okay, that's good to know.
It is intentionally vague. So that is where the advocacy of your child comes in. It's where it's kind of where you define, like, yeah, he's making progress, but is this the progress that we expect? Is this the that's great that he's taking one step forward, but all the other kids are taking 5. So special education doesn't guarantee perfection. That's not the goal. The goal is to get them commensurate with their peers. And so that's kind of, I guess, the short answer, how you measure progress, but again, intentionally vague. It really just depends on what the goal is for your child in the school system.
And Bridgette, can I just jump in real quick with that? It's going to be different, like you're saying that special education is not trying to hit perfection, but commensurate with the peers. You know, there are some kids that are not going to make progress on the same rate that the other kids are, that their peers are. So part of that, I think part of that progress is measured through the IEP process. You know, that's the ARD meeting. That's why we kind of sit down once a year, and there should be goals in there that are appropriate. And that's kind of another way that we're going to measure progress. Did they achieve those goals over the past year, or did they at least move towards achieving those goals? So that's kind of another way that we can measure it too.
So it sounds like it's highly customizable. Would that be fair? Which can be a double-edged sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, ideally it's supposed to be, right? I mean, it's supposed to be customizable for what that student needs. So that's kind of what we're shooting for.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And I always go back to, it's an individualized education plan. So
Yeah. Okay.
it should be individualized to your child. They shouldn't have the same education plan. If you have 10 kids, you know, if I have 10 kids with autism, they all should not have the same plan. They're all different kids and they all have different needs. So that's the big piece of it. This is supposed to be individualized to meet them where they're at and then scaffold them to where they need to be. In whatever, when I am going to go into goals in a couple of slides, and you measure goals in different ways. And the way the school writes them is, you know, this child will be able to have a positive social interaction with their peer, with support in 4 out of 5 instances. You know, it has to be measurable. And then that's how you measure progress once you're already in special education. But before you're there, and if you're wondering whether or not special education is right for your child or that's what you want to pursue, then that progress is kind of like, is your definition of progress. And then the school will say, well, that's not our definition. So this is where we come to meet about how we can work with that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then, let me pause real quick. So I found a short video on modifications versus accommodations, just because I think it gets switched around a little bit, because if your child only needs accommodations and that's it, 504 is perfect. That's what you need. If the only thing you need is accommodations, which is just making the environment more of a level playing field. If your child needs modifications, changes in the curriculum that the school has set out, that's special education. And I do think that sometimes, especially when trying to navigate the very complicated process of special education and 504 and all of that, it can get a little mixed up. So this was just a short video just with some pretty basic examples, but it kind of helped me conceptualize how to explain it. Okay. So I hope that was just like a pretty, again, there's so many accommodations and modifications that you can make in special education and 504. That's just it's a very, very short and basic list, but just highlighting kind of the essential differences between special education and 504. And then types of services. So the benefit of special education is that you do get, you have access to different services based on your child's needs. So the most basic type of service and kind of in the least restrictive environment is support facilitation. So basically your child is in a classroom with a paraprofessional or other teacher that is on his or her caseload. And that person would go around and make sure that, they're either attending to the task or they're in the right spot, they're able to pay attention, they're focused. So just kind of like an extra kind of hand to help them out. Resource is pullout. So that's a little bit more restrictive. You typically see this on the elementary school level, reading resource and math resource if they're struggling in either of those subjects. Or in all of the subjects, then you can get pulled out for kind of small group with a special education teacher. Specialized programming, those are the behavioral programs. Those are the applied skills programs. So just again, it gets more restrictive. So support facilitation, least restrictive, specialized programming, most restrictive. Just depending on what your child needs. And each school district kind of has their own version of things. In my school district, we have steps for behavior. And then we have the behavior and academic classroom, which is its own classroom. So everybody's school district, they all have different names for them. But that is kind of the most restrictive programming for special education. And then in special education, so you qualify, your child qualifies for special education, and you have your meeting and you have goals to address the deficits. And the campus develops the goals, but you as a parent, I also have this on, I think the next slide, but you as a parent, they're drafts of the goals. So you go into the meeting and they're like, we want to work on this and this and this. And you say, okay, well, I think, you can add in what you want them to work on, or if you think that that's a reasonable goal for them, or if, I've seen some goals where it's like, he can do that. I'd like to work on something else. And then related services like physical and occupational therapy, as well as psych services, which is what I do a lot of, and counseling services. So things to remember when qualifying for special education, they have to show educational need. So that's kind of their party line. You have to show educational need, but educational need does not only address academic issues. Emotional, behavioral, social concerns are all involved in education. And then the goal of special education is to get your child commensurate with their same aged peers. And not saying that, again, it's not perfection, but you meet them where they're at and you scaffold at their pace and at their level. So, if your child is able to get dismissed from special education, that means that they have achieved that goal. They're kind of where they need to be in the eyes of the school. But in 504, it's to accommodate the environment. It's just to make sure it's how they access the curriculum, which is also what that video talked about. And then I added on here just the recommended accommodations that Dr. Truba had it on there. So these are some fairly basic accommodations. I've seen them not just for kids with Duchenne's. I've seen some of these for kids with autism or kids with emotional dysregulation, and they just need scheduled breaks. They need excused absences if they have to go to doctor's appointments, things like that. Okay. So this is kind of like the timeline. So if you're just getting started in this, the initial referral, all the way to annual ARDs, review ARDs, reevaluations, things like that. So for initial referrals, just for everybody's, I guess, your information, knowing what your rights are. If you make a parent request, it's not the campus requesting it. You write to the school and you say, I would like my child evaluated for special education services. The school has to respond to your request within 15 school days, not 15 calendar days. So it's going to be a full 3 weeks. If you do it right before Thanksgiving break, it's going to be a full 4 weeks. So those 15 days, they do get used. So, and that's for a parent request. If your child is already in school, initial consent. So we get the initial referral. We say, yes, we are going to test them for special education services. At that point, we have 45 school days to complete the evaluation. And in almost every district I know, that 45 school days is every single day of that is used. So it is a long process. And it doesn't go quickly. And especially if you're just like ready to go and get those services into place, that can be difficult to kind of have to go through. You've got 15 days from you asking, and then 45 school days to complete the evaluation. And then from the 45 school days you have to complete it, you have 30 calendar days to hold the ARD. So again, long process, but they do have to meet those timelines. So it doesn't go on forever, but it does take a little bit. ARD.
Sorry, Bridget, I was trying to unmute me and I muted you. Quick question. Are you able to request this during the summer?
You can write in a request to the special education department, but it is 15 school days. So if school's out of session, then those days don't start.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Does it count for teacher in service?
No, any day. Yeah. School days are days that the kids are at school.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yes. Implementation of services. So if your child does qualify for special education services, those services get implemented within 5 school days from the date of the ARD. And that is to get either the school, if there were changes in schedule, you need to get everybody on board. They need to take those 5 days to get all of that set. If it's like a very small change, they might ask you, do you want to waive your 5 school days? And that's always your right as a parent. You can say yes or no. You can say, yes, I'd like to waive my 5 school days. You can go ahead and get this started tomorrow. Or you can say, no, I need to prepare my child for these changes. I'd like to wait all 5 days. And then, so from there, your child's in special education, and every single year you have an annual ARD, and the annual ARD is where you measure progress. You talk about goals, you update the goals, you see what's working, what's not working, and that has to happen at least annually. Now, I will say you do have a right as a parent to call an ARD at any point if you're concerned about the goals, if you feel like they're not making progress and you need to change something, you can always request an ARD. It doesn't have to be just annually. And then reevaluations, they have to occur at least every 3 years. I really don't recommend any sooner than every 3 years, just because you do need a lot of time to grow unless there have been changes. So there's always exceptions. If there have been changes to really anything, life circumstances, if you feel like their cognitive achievement testing would be different the next time around and you want them tested, if you think they're way ahead in achievement, but it's not being measured on the annual goals like you're seeing it, you can ask for more achievement testing. But the reevaluation has to occur at least every 3 years. And that's typically done through what's called a READ meeting. It's a review of existing evaluation data. And that is where the ARD committee comes together and they talk about each section of the evaluation, where your child is at, have there been any changes? Do we think that we need to reevaluate? Now, even if the school says no and you say yes, they'll reevaluate, the school will reevaluate. If you feel like it needs to happen, you have a right to a 3-year reevaluation. Now, there's also times when you're like, no, I really like the plan. I think this is exactly where he needs to be. I don't think there's anything, any other eligibility, any other really big changes that we need to address via evaluation. We've already done it in the ARD meeting. Then you can carry forward the previous evaluation. You don't have to go through the whole process. And that's really just dependent on how your child is doing. Typically, I like to try to do reevaluations after big transitions. They get through it. I don't like to do it during. So I don't like to evaluate 5th going into 6th grade. I like to get them once they're there and then see where they're at and they're all nice and settled, instead of that kind of odd in between time. But that's just preference as far as how I think the kids do best.
Bridget, I've got another question for you. Could you go back to the previous slide? So for that 3-year, so several things come to mind that I know you're familiar with Duchenne. In a 3-year time, you could go easily from a child ambulating to using a power chair full time. You could have a child enter a clinical trial. You could have hospital stays. So for that 3-year, even if cognitively and academically, well, I guess what I'm saying is if their physical change or if their stressors change in the home situation, and it's affecting their academics, is that a justifiable reason? And would it be, I guess, considered legitimate for a reevaluation? Does that make sense?
Yes, and it depends, because you can, with big changes and things like that, with big changes in life circumstances, inflation, anything like that, a reevaluation is like bare minimum. That's what we are required to do by law. We need to make sure that we reevaluate them every 3 years. We can reevaluate them we can't reevaluate them more than once a year, because then in the same area, because then it kind of invalidates the testing data. But you can reevaluate in specific areas too. If you only want achievement retested and you only want, related services readdressed, you can look at that. You can do it very specified. I'm good in these areas. I don't need that reassessed, but I would like this reassessed. So it's always a discussion within the ARD committee, and they may suggest, we can put these changes into place already. If this is what you're telling us your child needs, we see it, and we can put that into place as part of the ARD meeting. So it's all very fluid, and it all is kind of partially based on your relationship with the school and kind of having that really open communication of this is what they need, and advocating for your child and how they're going to do in the classroom.
Thank you.
So if you've been a part of an ARD committee, you know this, but if you haven't and you're just starting out, these are the basic members that you have to have for a legally constituted ARD. Yourself as a parent, or parents. If really you can invite whomever you want. I always recommend at least having 2 sets of ears in these meetings, just because it's so overwhelming, especially the initial ones where you're just getting a lot of information all at one time. And it's really easy to leave the meeting and realize that you forgot to ask something or you weren't sure about something. So it's nice for one to go in there and kind of be like, okay, this is what my child needs. And another person to say, well, what exactly does that mean? Well, how is that going to be implemented? So kind of just having that extra set of ears if possible. I just think it's really helpful, and parents are typically more comfortable. If it's, I've seen mom and her mom come in, or grandparents come in, or really just like kind of any important people that have that are involved in that child's education or life. General education teacher is always involved, and special education teacher is always involved, as well as the campus administrator. So those are kind of the 4 essential pieces of it. And then the ancillary members, like I called them, are evaluators and related service providers. So really the only time evaluators and related service providers will be directly involved is if you are directly discussing those things. In annual ARD meetings, as an evaluator, I don't typically attend annual ARD meetings because you're discussing goals. You're not discussing eligibility concerns. As an emotional behavioral specialist, sometimes I get called in to address emotional behavioral concerns, but I'm not necessarily in there as an evaluator. I'm in there as an emotional behavioral specialist. Types of ARD.
Bridgette, could we, I think this would be a good time to get Doug in there, since we just did the PTOT, and
Absolutely.
then after that, we can jump back to you.
Hello.
Thank you, Bridgette.
Thanks, Bridget. That was awesome. I want to just real quick, just a little bit of housekeeping. I did not put Doug the Great for my name. That was Lindy. And if anybody, there are a few people on here that know me, I would not have done that. So,
and yet, Doug, you didn't change it. So.
Well, that's because I'm horrible at technology and I'm totally not sure how to change it. So, let's talk about, I'm going to talk about physical therapy and occupational therapy. I'm obviously, like I said, a PT, but the 2 things go hand in hand because they're considered related services. And so all that I'm going to talk about today applies, in this kind of new world with COVID and virtual learning and all of that. All the things that I'm going to talk about will apply whether it's in person or virtual or anything like that. It's just the implementation of those services might look different if it's virtual than if it's in person. And the first thing that I want to talk about is the difference between, because this is probably either the question I get the most or what I hear about the most, is the difference between school therapy and clinic-based therapy. And I'm lumping in like home-based therapy with clinic. But what are the expectations? What are the differences? And really, because I hear, again, being a clinic therapist, being a school therapist, I hear both sides of it. And the biggest thing is that the approach is different. Bridget and Leona had kind of laid the groundwork nicely for what it looks like, but basically, for physical therapy or occupational therapy, there needs to be some sort of issue or disability that affects their ability to receive an education. So there are times in the school that I'll evaluate somebody and maybe their balance is a little bit off, or maybe they have left-sided weakness, or they walk up on their toes on the right, but it's really not affecting their ability to get an education. They're getting on and off the bus fine. They're participating in PE and recess and lunch and can access the restroom and the classroom and all of that. I might not recommend therapy. So it's really going to be, how does it impact the education? And then the other thing is that when I'm seeing a child in the home or when I'm seeing a child in the clinic, it's one-on-one. I'm directly working with that child the whole time. It's hands-on. We're working on whatever we need to work on directly. In the school, we're considered, like Bridgette said, we're considered a related service. So we work primarily through the classroom staff, mostly through the teacher. So sometimes in the school, sometimes that's hands-on, sometimes that's consultation with the teacher, sometimes that's observation of how they're doing in recess or walking down the hall. So it's just a different approach. Sometimes when I have my clinic therapist hat on and I'm doing that, I'll hear from parents not knowing that I'm a school therapist, and they'll say like, well, those, you know, they're not really getting anything in school. They don't do anything in the school at all. And I don't know for sure because I'm not there, but like I know when I see kids in the school, I'm probably working harder or looking at more things than when I'm doing clinic-based. So it's a lot of observation. It's a lot of different environments, trying to see how they're performing in all these different environments, and then helping to formulate the goals and the implementation through the teacher. So I might see, like in a clinic, I might see a child once a week or twice a week. In the school, it might be 3 times per 6 weeks or once a month or whatever is needed, because I'm implementing some sort of strategy with the teacher and the teacher's aides, allowing them, because they're with the student every day, allowing them to implement those things. And then I come back and check, how is it going? Is that helping? Is it not helping? Do we need to tweak it? So there's definitely a different approach. It's not that I know plenty of clinic therapists that are terrible, and I know plenty of clinic therapists that are good, and vice versa for school therapists. So it's just, you know, I can't stress it enough. It's just a different lens that we're looking through for that. So when it comes to Duchenne, because that's what this talk is about today, I would say the most important thing as a parent is to make sure that the therapist understands what Duchenne is. There are a lot of, I mean, it's considered a rare disease. There are a lot of really good pediatric physical therapists that I know of that have just never seen a child with Duchenne before in their 15 or 20-year career. So I wouldn't necessarily assume that they know all the ins and outs and what should be done and what should not be done. That's why it's important to arm yourself with the knowledge and the information first. And then if the therapist doesn't understand what Duchenne is, or you don't feel like they do, then you want to call a meeting and give them the information and make sure that they do understand. With the physical therapy and the occupational therapy, we're looking at lots and lots of different environments. So let me just kind of briefly go over some of those. PE and recess is a big one, and this really depends on where on the spectrum they lie. I mean, are they primarily in a wheelchair for their mobility? Are they ambulatory? Are they kind of at that transition time where they're falling more, their balance is poor? So the physical therapist's role should always be about inclusion as much as possible. So I talk with the PE coaches, you know, what are you guys doing this semester? What are you working on? Okay, so, you know, Dietrich's not going to be able to do that. That's going to be really difficult. So how can we find a different way to have him included and have him participate? It seems really, really antiquated, but I still see it now that there are some, I was trying to think of the best like political way to say this. There's some really well-meaning teachers or PE coaches that just don't get it. So I've seen kids with Duchenne, like if the rest of the class in PE is working on basketball, they're sitting over here in the corner. It should not be that way. There should be inclusion. Yes, they might not be able to or shouldn't perform the same activities, but if we can include them in some way. So it's helping to problem solve with the PE coach. And same thing at recess. You know, a lot of time for recess is I mean, it's primarily physical. And it's really important to have the kids included. What I've seen some of the schools do that works really well is like a buddy system, and that kind of rotates. So maybe it's a different student every week gets to be a buddy with that child. And if you kind of frame it in that way, my experience has been that most of the kids want to be a buddy. They can't wait to be a buddy. And then during that time, maybe they're doing Legos or robotics or something that's not as physically demanding. And then other kids a lot of times come over and want to see what they're doing. So, so it's an opportunity for inclusion, and it's an opportunity to teach the other students about inclusion. Lindy, you asked, could we, in terms of PE, can we give some concrete examples of accommodations versus modifications? They're not mutually exclusive, they are different. So let's see, you're putting me on the spot here. So for PE, I would say a modification, like let's say that they're working on basketball. That unit is basketball, and they're doing dribbling and running. A modification would be changing the activity somewhat so that maybe that child is just working on dribbling, or maybe they're working on passing to the other kids as they dribble down the court. So they're still involved in the game, they're still involved in the activity, but it's not as physically demanding. So I would say that's more of a modification. An accommodation for that, Bridgette, if you have any ideas, I'm struggling here to come up with like an accommodation, because a lot of times in PE, it is more modification because we do have to change the activity. I think in terms of PE, there is more overlap with accommodations and modifications. But I don't know, Bridgette, do you have any input on that?
Not specifically for like the physical, I guess, piece of it in PE. I'm trying to think of.
Yeah, I mean, I just think most of the time it's going to be a modification. It's going to be a changing of the activity slightly, and that's important for us as therapists to give that guidance to the PE coach, because that can be overwhelming. They don't understand, like, so do I have to change my whole curriculum? Do I have to come up with for the whole class a completely different thing? Maybe yes, but more than likely no. Maybe we can just modify it slightly so that child is included.
But Doug, isn't it true? I mean, you can have both. So you can have both special education and Section 504. So if it's not covered under special education protections, then go ahead and lean on Section 504.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And as far as like PE goes, special education, a lot of it is about like instructional minutes. So the PE like curriculum, really anything you do to change it, it doesn't, as long as they're getting the same number of minutes that they would a general education child in PE, you wouldn't even necessarily, that should all be able to be covered in 504 as an accommodation, just because PE, as far as I know, doesn't have like a specified, they need to meet these like curriculum requirements in the same way that instructional minutes mean.
Yeah,
I'm not familiar with the PE.
I don't know for sure. I do know as much that there are units that they have to cover, but I'm not sure how they measure that like they would an academic kind of thing.
Right, but it's not like performance based, like you don't fail PE.
Right. Correct.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
So in terms of educating the PTs, yes, sweetie, the PTs or the OTs or even the PE teachers, Doug, if you could take a minute, I've got a 2-year-old in my arm, so I can't type it in the chat. Could you take a minute and talk about Cure Duchenne certification program? And then also, I believe Jennifer has a few, I think there's 2 YouTube channels or 2 YouTube videos on her channel that talk about, now again, I'm new to all of this. I don't know if it's modification or accommodations, but she does talk about changing up the PE situation for a child with Duchenne. So if you could talk Cure Duchenne for a second, that'd be great. How are you frozen, Doug?
Also, one of those, it was some fantastic information. There's a bunch of different tabs at the top, and if you go under the care tab and then you toggle down, there's lots of good stuff. There's stuff on stretching on there, and the website, if I didn't say it, is cureduchenne.org. And so there's information and videos on stretching, but also on school-based therapy and educational, energy conservation, modifications and accommodations, like Lindy was saying, physical therapy in the school, what it looks like, information that you can give to the teachers and to the therapists. So there's a lot of really good information that you can print out or send the links to teachers or therapists. So somebody had asked before, I don't know if it was Lindy or not, about, should you have a meeting like during the summer? I think as best as you can, especially if it's a teacher that has never had a child with Duchenne before, I think it's really important to be proactive. And so maybe ask to set up a meeting and then come with a little, some information, like Leona was talking about, an IEP binder, but just information about Duchenne. And also you can refer them, like on the Cure Duchenne website, about what Duchenne is and in the schools and energy conservation. I've given those links out to teachers before that had no idea what Duchenne was, and they said it was really helpful and really appreciative, and they were happy that they had a better understanding of the child and the limitations and what should be done, what shouldn't be done. Another thing that the therapist, and you want to ask your therapist to address, and they should be addressing, is the classroom setup. So if they're in a power wheelchair, even if they're not in a power wheelchair, we want to make sure that they can access the classroom. Is there enough space in between desks? Do we need to maybe, if there are behavioral or attention issues, do we need to put them at the front of the classroom? Can they access that? For the littler kids, like kindergarten age, first grade, where they're doing more floor time and circle time in the mornings and things like that, for a lot of these boys, even early on, it's difficult to get up and down from the floor. It takes a lot of strength. It wears on their muscles. It uses a lot of energy. So how can we address that? Can we give them maybe like a low chair that they can still be with all their friends, but it's much easier to get up and down? So just looking at the setup of the classroom and kind of going along with that is, what does their schedule look like? So a lot of the newer schools, if it's a middle school or high school, they have elevators, but some of the older schools don't have elevators. So, are we asking them to go up and down? If there's no elevators, are we asking them to go up and down the stairs multiple times a day? that's really bad. That's gonna potentially cause muscle damage. How far apart are the classes spread out? Can we tweak their schedule a little bit so that they don't have to walk as far? We want to look at like the cumulative amount of walking throughout the day, not just they have one class that's really far away, but the others are pretty close. You know, it all adds up. So if all of the classes are a medium size amount away from each other, they could end up walking a whole lot more than one class that's in a different building. So we want to look at that too. Is there a way to make their schedule so they can conserve the energy? Also, Dr. Truba talked about that that a lot of times the academic, like the kids perform better if they just get fatigued. The academic, the ability to concentrate, the behavioral stuff kind of goes downhill towards the end of the day, the latter half of the day. So is it possible to put those core classes that take a lot more concentration for them at the earlier part of the day? And then looking at access to the school, what do things look like? Are there ramps or a few stairs to get in and out? If they're in a power chair, can they access all parts of the school? Can they get to everything? The last part that I want to talk about, and I'm sure that I've left some things off of there, and you know, please ask questions if I have, but I can't say this enough. Planning ahead of time, thinking of things ahead of time, being proactive is probably the most important thing with Duchenne. So field trips, emergency type situations, you know, if there's a fire, if there's a shooter, if there's a weather-related emergency, how do we get them down the stairs? How do we get them to a safe place quickly? How do we get them out of the building quickly? If they're ambulatory and they don't use a power chair, but their walking is not great, do we need to have a manual chair there so we can just kind of zip them out the door real quick if there's a fire or an emergency like that? So planning those things ahead of time. And then even like if there are performances that the child might be involved in on a stage, you know, like a play or a musical or something that they're involved in, graduation from elementary school, can they access that stage? I mean, and we want to think about that ahead of time, because I've had some situations where the schools didn't think about that until the last minute. And then they were coming up with all kinds of things that were really bringing attention to the child, like having two coaches lift them up on the stage or something. Whereas I think if they would have tried to address these things earlier or thought of them earlier, there could have been a better solution all the way around. So trying to address those things as best as possible. And that's, you know, in planning ahead and inclusion are the biggest things. I mean, these are kids like any other kids. They don't want to be left out. They don't want to, you know, be sitting over here while the rest of the class is doing this. So how do we include them as best as we can? And I know it's not always our job as parents to teach other kids, but I also try to look at it as a learning opportunity for other kids that, hey, you know, he might not be able to walk, but he likes the same exact things that you do. And I use those opportunities. If I'm working with somebody hands-on, like in the hallway in an elementary school, sometimes kids will just walk by and they'll kind of stare. I think more, they're not trying to be mean, they're just curious. Maybe they haven't seen anybody with braces on or in a wheelchair. And so they will get real quiet and they'll just walk by and they'll sort of stare as they go by. And I always use that as an opportunity. I was like, hey guys, come over here, meet my friend John. You know, this is John, you know, what are your guys' names? And all of a sudden there's a back and forth and it really kind of breaks the ice. So I think there's lots of opportunities for that in the schools.
Thank you, Doug, so much for that. And thanks for taking a second and touching on the human side of all of this. It's easy to get caught up in oh gosh, rules and science and this and that. But yeah, my kid's a kid just like any other kid, and he wants to be involved and included. And when he did some plays, he did some theater, we had to modify some things, but you know, he was able to slide in and not interrupt the flow of the performance, which was so valuable for him.
Yeah.
And Doug, you cut out for a second. I don't know if everybody heard or is aware, but Doug is one of the certifying PTs with Cure Duchenne along with Jennifer. So he he knows what he's talking about most of the time.
Sorry, real quick. If you go also onto Cure Duchenne's website, they have Cure Duchenne. We train therapists about Duchenne and get them certified so that they know exactly what they're doing. And if you go onto the Cure Duchenne website under it's under that care tab, I think it says find a therapist. All the certified therapists are listed by state, so you can see if there's one that's near you. And I don't know, Lindy, if you have my contact information, Facebook and email and phone number, you're welcome to put that in the chat. If you guys ever have specific questions or need help or need me to talk to another therapist or a PE coach, I'm always happy to do that.
Thank you so much for that, Doug. I've put in the chat the link to the P2 certification. If you have a PT, you can tell them about it. It's an online training. They're having, they're starting up the in-person shortly, right, Doug? But it's for like secondary or follow-up certification. The primary one, the first level, so to speak, is still online. And yeah, thank you, Doug. And it's a great course. I attended it shortly, just a few months after my son was diagnosed. And so it got me up to speed about what it is and the physical changes and how to accommodate or modify. I don't know which of them, one of them. So that was definitely a great course. And then in the chat also, guys, I've plopped down those two YouTube links about Jennifer. She's the other certifying PT with Cure Duchenne that she created several years ago about school. And then yes, Doug and Bridgette and Leona are all in the Family Friends and Duchenne Educator Therapist and Parents group. So that's another way to contact him or to ask questions. Let's see. And so Bridgette, I think we're going back to you for the ARD meeting unless anybody has some questions for Doug. And let's unmute you. Okay.
Okay, so just as far as ARD goes, again, there's so many ins and outs, so I really try to focus on all of the details and like what the differences are and all of the lingo. You know, so you'll get notices for an initial ARD, an annual ARD, a review ARD. If your child happens to have a behavioral issue and they're recommending a change of placement for disciplinary purposes, they'll ask for a manifestation determination review, which is also an ARD. Those are a completely different type because you just kind of focus on the behavior of it, but it is still a legally constituted ARD. And then also read meetings, which still do consist of the ARD committee, but you don't necessarily go through all of the goals that you would normally go through in ARD. So there's just a lot of kind of little differences, and I find that it's nice. I like knowing what to expect, and I think most people do, as what you're getting into. So an initial ARD is just like what it sounds. It's you get your child initially evaluated, and then you have an initial ARD meeting, and at that time you determine whether or not they qualify for special education services, which is an ARD committee decision. And ARD committee, it sounds like everybody goes around the table and takes a vote. It's more of the parent agrees and the administrator agrees. And those are the two like legal ones that you need. And that's typically how it goes. because teachers typically agree with the administrator, and then, you know, if it's everybody's on the same page and everything's good to go, then you move forward, you implement the services, you have a plan in place, and everything's all good. And then I know, you know, I don't know, I forget if you had already talked about it, but if it does not end in an agreement, if you disagree about what services or what goals there are, and the school's just like not budging, then there's a whole other process for that.
Leona will take care of that in a second.
Yeah.
I have a quick question for you, Bridgette. Do you recommend or not recommend the student being in his own ARD or IEP meeting?
I think it completely depends on their age. I typically do not recommend it until minimally middle school, and just depending on like how reflective they are about their own, what they're going through. I typically leave it up to the parents as far as to explain either if they're getting a lot of services, you know, why they're getting it. But I've found that when kids are in there, any younger than the later middle school years, they get overwhelmed, because it's all the adults in the same room. They don't get a lot of input, and they're typically like so nervous just kind of being there, that I haven't found that they've gotten a lot out of it. Now, once they get into high school, they are part of the ARD committee. They're in there. So again, in middle school, I think it would be more appropriate, but younger than that, I would be a little hesitant. I've had it a few times, and it's certainly not against the rules, but I do find it makes it difficult for the teachers and the campus and everybody to just have kind of an open conversation, because it's like you're talking about them in front of them, and then I don't like to do that, you know, then I'm trying to talk to them, but so it just ends up being kind of a lot and overwhelming, and I haven't really found that they've gotten a lot of benefit from it.
Thank you for that.
Uh-huh.
Did I interrupt you? Do you have any more to cover on this slide?
Just annual ARDs happen every year. Review ARDs are if you needed to just put something kind of minor into place or just make one small change. That doesn't have to be a completely new ARD. If you need to put a behavior intervention plan in place, they'll call it a review ARD. So you briefly review everything. You say, we're putting this into place because of this. Everybody agrees, you're good to go. Manifestation determination review is also a review ARD. That's if your child had like a significant behavioral issue and the school was recommending them be out of their placement for over 10 days. And that is a completely different topic that I could go on for probably hours about, but that's just a brief overview of that. And then this is my last slide. My next one is just resources that I like to use. But just what to bring to your IEP meeting. Bring your concerns, write them down. Once you get in there, it doesn't seem like it's going to be overwhelming, but it is. It always is. There's always a lot of people talking. There's always, you know, going back and forth. And I have found that parents come back and they're like, I wish I had said this. I wish I had said this. So if you write it down, and you kind of like go through and you're like, okay, we address this, we address this, we address this. And then you also have it kind of for your records. You know, I always like to go into ARD meetings, you know, hoping for the best with, you know, a positive attitude. You know, generally everybody wants your child to succeed. And I think where difficulties arise is when the school and the parent disagree on how the best way to help them succeed is. So just coming back to kind of being child focused and what's going to be best for them, what you want your child to be able to achieve academically, behaviorally, and socially. So like bringing something to the table, I think it's helpful to have during those meetings. And then just collaborative attitude, ideas, you know, not a lot of people, most people I know, most people I work with are not familiar with Duchenne. So just ideas and some advocacy as far as like, this is what this is. And I know I don't expect you to know what it is, but I expect you to trust me to tell you what it is. And then knowledge of your rights. You're going to get notice of procedural safeguards. I always suggest you read them all the way through. It's just, you get them every meeting you have, and just having that background knowledge so that nothing gets left that shouldn't be left. And then these are some just pretty basic resources, but I use them quite a bit. You know, I Google on rights law all the time, just to, you know, I type in a question and pops up with an answer. You know, I find a lot of information on there. That's just a really quick, easy thing. IDEA, which is just the federal law legal framework. You can look up the legal framework for your district, what their policies and procedures are. And then like the National Association for School Psychologists, they're very big on advocacy for students, and they have a lot of really great resources. So all of those are websites that if you just type them into Google, that's the first thing that pops up.
Thank you, Bridget. Could you, I wasn't fast enough this time. Could you go back to your previous slide?
Yes. This one?
Yes, thank you. So when we have a professional, so for example, Doug has offered his input, Dr. Truba has offered her assistance as well. How do you get professionals involved to help educate the school? And, you know, a recurring theme has been, how can we get the school to believe us? You know, Duchenne is a rare disease, and it's so funny. I have a friend and we talk all the time, and she, you know, she's not in the Duchenne world. And I just constantly hear myself saying, it sounds like I'm making this up, but this is really happening. And so I can only imagine trying to convince, no, this is really what it is. It sounds like I'm lying. It sounds like this is ridiculous, but this is real life. And this is what really happens. So how can you communicate that and kind of get past the school having to do the same trial and error that you've already done? Does that make sense?
It does. And I don't want to make it seem like it's going to be easy because it's not easy. And because, you know, the school has kind of one priority, especially if you're not talking to like your child's case manager or your child's physical therapist or occupational therapist, who are like kind of directly involved in their individual progress. I find that sometimes the administrative aspect of it is more difficult because they're going at it from like a whole school perspective, and they're like, well, we can't do that. We don't have the resources for that, but they can't say they don't have the resources for that. So you kind of try to walk around all of that. And I think that's kind of the most difficult part is, you know, I'd say kind of start with the administrator. And if you have the administrator and you're able to kind of explain to them what it is, and, you know, get them on board. And like I said, you know, saying get them on board is easier said than done. It's all about relationship building, having a positive relationship with the school, having a positive relationship. I think if the teachers, you know, if your child's teacher knows what it is, it's just kind of like building a little team around your child. And I think that's been the best way, because then you have more than one person in the room other than you that knows what's going on.
So
But
if we send them videos of, you know, school accommodation, if we send them resources, will they really read them and watch them? I just know they're so busy. They can't do everything for every child.
So it depends. I think if you set up a specific time, if you kind of go about it, you know, I don't know if the administrator would, but maybe the 504 coordinator for the campus would.
Okay.
You know, I don't know if the teacher would, but maybe, you know, like it's just kind of, you know, trial and error of seeing who's there. The counselor typically has a pretty big involvement, especially in 504. the LSSP or diagnostician, because those are the people who make the recommendations on the initial evaluation for some of those emotional behavioral types of things. You know, I say especially the LSSP or the emotional behavioral specialist, if those are where your concerns are, find that person. You know, who's the LSSP for the campus, who's the emotional behavioral support person, because that's who I want to kind of get everybody on board with this.
And that's great. We actually have a school counselor here attending this meeting, and I might put her on the spot after we wrap up with Leona's side of it, if she wants to give any input also. Okay, thank you for that. And yeah, that's echoing what Dr. Green told us in one of our previous webinars, to find your in, find your in, and then they can kind of do the talking on their side of it once y'all are seeing eye to eye.
Hey, Lindy.
Yes.
Yeah, Heather had made a comment. She said that she had a parent that made a personalized pamphlet for one of the students and it was helpful. Absolutely. Some teachers, some schools, administrators are going to be more receptive than others, but I would keep it condensed, you know, like those YouTube videos that my colleague Jennifer did. They're like 3 to 6 minutes each. So, I mean, especially in the last year or two, the teachers are overwhelmed, they're overworked, they have so much going on, they have other students. So the easier you can make it and the more condensed, I think that's helpful. And most, I think, most want to help and are open to that, as long as they don't have to sit down and read like a 300-page book.
And
I think I like bringing the 300-page binder to our meetings. I get to have it as backup to go to my tab to make my point for whatever it is. I mean, ARD meetings are so intimidating. I mean, parents, when an ARD is coming up, they're going to suffer from anxiety just because it feels like you're fighting with everybody at the table whenever you want something for your child and nobody is listening to you. So one of the best ways to combat that is to work ahead of time with the special ed teacher, with the general ed teacher, with the coaches, whomever is really impacting their child's school, their school life, and try to work on looking at a draft of the IEP before the ARD meeting, so you kind of know what goals are being targeted, what the challenges are, and then flesh them out before the meeting. I know that a lot of parents feel like they have to sign at the end of the ARD meeting the IEP. They need to acknowledge their attendance, but they don't have to agree to everything. There's a lot, they may feel that there's a lot of pressure, but it's not mandatory. You can even ask to basically take a timeout and reconvene, I think in like 10 days maximum, and review what the offer was in the IEP and try to negotiate something in the middle where you can get services for your child and the school's not feeling overwhelmed by trying to give so many supports and services to your child maybe at the risk of somebody else missing out. I know there's always a concern for the limited resources that the schools have. So it's important to try and do a little bit of communicating before the IEP meeting so that it can be successful. But parents aren't the only ones that can't attend. Parents can have representatives. So if you want to have a special education advocate there, great. If you want to bring maybe someone like Doug to explain why the therapy is very important, great. you can invite other people. Now there's different rules for different states. So sometimes you have to do a certain number of days notice in writing that you're going to bring an advocate or something. But if, let's say you go on, let's see, after having an IEP, what happens to Section 504 plan? Those are two different things. So you can have IEPs for special education. And I think Heather had said something earlier, like while you're in the process of getting an IEP set, you can get a Section 504 plan in place because it's quicker. An IEP is the individualized education program. That plan is a contract. Once it's signed up, the school district must deliver. If they don't, then that's where we're having, let's see. If they don't, then you can, let's say you have a child with comorbidity and there is maybe intellectual disability or behavioral issues due to challenges due to autism. So you have DMD and some extra fun stuff for your child. So what you can do whenever it looks like the school is going to take away some services, you definitely can object. And if you reconvene after 10 days and you're still not coming to an agreement, one of the things that you can do is go ahead and ask that the current IEP is still in place. It's called Stay Put, and that you go ahead and you can request mediation. You can, if that's not working for you to negotiate with the school, then you can file a complaint with the state agency in Texas. It's Texas Education Agency. You can request a due process hearing. There's different legal rights that you have after the ARD meeting if that ARD meeting is not working out well and you're not getting the services and support that your child needs. So you do have options. I don't recommend inviting a special education attorney to your first ARD meeting. It puts out a very negative vibe. I would try to talk to your special ed teacher and see exactly what the challenges are. See if that matches up with the daily reports that you're getting for your child, and seeing how they are, if they're having good days, if they're having behavior issues, if their needs are being met or not, and try and figure out why, and then everybody come together at the ARD meeting to try and address that. But yes, you don't have to sign the IEP at the end of the day. So take your time and make sure that your child is getting the services that they need. So Bridgette, do you deal with any appeals or anything in the appellate process after having an unsuccessful ARD?
So I, as an evaluator, I typically get the, if I'm reevaluating in a certain area or, but not necessarily, the appeals process, no.
So if I could jump in real quick, and then I'm going to see if Heather has any other input. So approximately give me a timeline. My brain's a little mush, all of this, all this information. I can only imagine what other parents are feeling right now. How long does it take from the time you're like, oh, my kiddo needs some help, to it actually being instated? Does that make sense?
It depends on how everything depends. Special education is highly individualized.
Can you give us a range?
So, depend again, 60 days is like kind of like a nice legal number as far as from the date of consent, but from the date of concern, that is if you put in a written parent request, that is the fastest route to get your child evaluated through special education. You put it in writing, you send it to the special education director, or you send it to your campus, and you say, I, so-and-so's mother, am requesting special education assessment due to concerns with so. So when you make that written request, you have to, the school, again, in that kind of my timeline slide, the school has to respond within 15 days. If you wait for the school to make the referral, that's a lot longer process, because then the school gathers referral data from everybody, which is great information. But it also takes longer if you wait for the school to do it. So if you do want it to start as quickly as possible, you make the parent request and you put it in writing and send it directly to, every school website has special education information on it. You can send it to your campus if you have a nice relationship with the administrator, or even the teacher, but I would send it to either to the administrator or to the special education department.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we do have a guest here who's attending, who is a school counselor, and she has experience with a little bit of experience with Duchenne. Heather, do you have anything else that you wanted to jump in there from the school side? We've been chatting in the chat, but for those watching the recording, it would be great to have it here too.
Sure. Sorry, I'm not super presentable. I wasn't expecting to kind of jump on, but I'm Heather Binberg. I am a school counselor. I also deal with the 504s on a campus in Alvin ISD. And so basically, there was a few points I wanted to kind of make. First of all, if you're a parent, please don't ever hesitate to reach out to the school. We're in the business of service and helping families and helping kids. And so if you feel any resistance, like I said before, it truly takes a village. I know that's cliche and overused a lot of times, but we're in the business of wanting what's best for kids too. So please don't ever feel like you can't reach out to the school. And if you ever had any concerns or anything like that, just reach out to the administrator, the campus principal, the school counselor, that kind of thing. The point that I wanted to make about 504 too, I had mentioned earlier that basically it is a long process to get the ARD facilitated and go into the meeting and the IEP and the evaluation and all that. It's a very long process. And it is that way for a reason, because it's so extensive and it's looking at so many different perspectives and making sure that we're meeting the needs of our students in the best way possible. But as a 504 coordinator, I want you to know there's a lot of accommodations and a lot of things we can put into place in the meantime while that process is taking place, and it's pretty immediate. I've gotten a doctor's note before from excuse me, a parent, and then we had the meeting the next day, sometimes even that day if the parents want to do that. Typically we'd like to give it a 5-day window, but I try to do what's best for parents and what their needs are. And so we can put accommodations in the classroom, PEs, recess, those kinds of things, like, like we were talking about with physical therapy. I've done that before with different areas. And 504 can encompass so many things, anything from anxiety, depression, ADD, ADHD, any kind of medical disorder, those kinds of things. It's all, I kind of think of it like it's the net after special education. Like if special education doesn't catch it, 504 can catch it and give those supports to kids. And actually people use those in the workplace sometimes too. So sorry, I went off on a 504 spiel, but it's kind of a passion of mine. I want to make sure that these kids, and families are supported in our schools and get those accommodations that they need. I can't think, there was something else I felt like I wanted to say, but I can't remember. Were there any questions about it?
Let me go back through the chat and see. 504, talk to the school counselor, a personalized pamphlet.
Oh yeah. Okay. So I've only had one parent ever do this, but it was so incredibly helpful. I think the question was posed earlier, like, will the teachers read it? Will the staff members actually like care or look into it? I've had different students over the years. I've had a student with Duchenne's, and then I've had there's another one that was pretty significant. I've had anxiety and depression and different things under 504, but then there was another one, a Chiari malformation. It's in the brainstem. It's it affects motor and depth perception and different things like that as well. And you know, the things that are printed from the internet and things like that, sometimes they're a little bit hard to read for teachers. But I had a parent, and this was more for anxiety, but just, you know, had a picture of their child on the pamphlet. And then like, this is what I see from my kid. Like, I just saw the passion of the parent. And it's kind of like what I see on y'all's Facebook page too. It's amazing. It's personalized. And so we really get to understand your kid, and it's concise. And it was just literally, it looked like a brochure all about the child. And I thought that was, at first, you know, it was, some of the teachers just kind of looked at me like, you're giving me a pamphlet about this child. But then like when they really read it, they were like, oh, I get it. So I thought it was really beneficial, and it was simple. It was simple. So it was really helpful and insightful to understand who that child was.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, it's I'm one of those parents who, if y'all can't tell yet, go into way too much detail. So it's helpful to be reminded, broad strokes. It's you know, there's different roles you're playing in these kids' lives. All right, great. So I've got two just questions from the audience. If anybody has anything else they want to say or ask about the presentation itself, if not, we can go into some specifics. We've got, yeah, maybe another 5 or 10 minutes if I can keep Doug from his vacation. Let's see if I can change the speaker view. Okay. Remove spotlight. Okay, so Doug, you thought you were the challenged one, speaker view. Okay. Here we go. So a couple questions. These are just one's general, one specific. Does anyone have a type of watch or device that they can communicate with their child at school? So the parents are kind of put at ease to make sure they're fully being taken care of, or if they need something but they don't feel comfortable asking the teacher. So is there a way the kids can communicate with the parents at school? Bridgette, Doug, Leona, or anybody else?
I've seen it only once before. It wasn't like an Apple Watch, but it was just kind of a simplified kids thing. It was like a watch, almost like a Fitbit, but you could talk or text back and forth. But I've only seen it one time, and I don't know how well it worked.
I've seen something for kids with attention deficit, where you can preset certain text messages on the watch to remind them to stay focused or something like that. But it wasn't for communication back and forth. I don't know if the school really wants to have that interference from outside of the school campus. Bridgette, have you seen that?
I have, not as far as like a watch goes, but just as far as a, you know, communicating via cell phone. And that would, again, like a very individualized, I guess, situation, because the school does not want to get into the habit of having that be kids communicating with their parents all day long. Just because it, for some people it works great. And then for other people, it can undermine the authority of the teacher. It can just cause like a lot of different problems within the school. And, through all of this and just working in special education, the relationship you have with the school is kind of vital for how your child is able to navigate the school environment. So if you have a positive relationship with the school and the teacher, you won't need a watch. You won't need, because, teachers will communicate with you all day long. They have all sorts of apps and they have all sorts of things, and they're typically very receptive to, hey, he's having a really rough day today. I was going to send him to the front to just give you a call. And so most of the time, if it's more informal, they'll kind of make it, exceptions for some kids. And if you have that good relationship, it's not a big deal. But if you kind of go in and say, this is what he needs right now, and it's like, well, we can't have kids texting their parents all day long. That's going to be, that would be difficult.
I know people that will send emails to the special ed teacher saying, my son started off with a bad morning, so just keep that in mind for the rest of the day. So it's more of communication with the other adult and not with your child specifically. That's what I've seen.
And in my experience, the teachers are super communicative. They will go above and beyond. They want to communicate with you. They appreciate parents who are involved and who give them information that they can use. So, teachers can be your biggest advocate for you and your child. So just really building that relationship with the teachers is helpful.
And you mentioning teachers brought something to mind, Bridgette, something Dr. Truba talks about in her webinar. And again, we've got that on our YouTube page, if y'all like to watch it, is the personality of the teacher. And for a child with Duchenne, you typically do not want somebody very authoritative, very my way or the highway, very, very much like that. Do you, as a parent, have liberties, or how would you go about communicating that with the school and getting a teacher who is a good fit?
My recommendation would be to talk to the counselor. The counselor is the person who does the scheduling. And, if your child does have a 504 plan, they're probably already familiar, because counselors are typically part of the 504 process. And so they won't formally say you have a say, because parents aren't supposed to have a say in, which teacher their child gets, but they do take into account, they want their classrooms to succeed. The administrators want their teachers to succeed. The teachers want their classrooms to succeed. It's all, everybody wants success for everybody else. And if there's a good case, and it's not just, I want my child in this class because his best friend is in here, but it's a goodness of fit. It's saying, hey, I'm not familiar with the teachers, but my child does best with this type of personality. Then just kind of, it gives them a little bit more autonomy. So it's kind of, it's a back and forth. But I would definitely reach out to the counselor first, because they're the ones who kind of, at least in my district, make those schedules.
Thank you for that. That's good information to have. I have one more question from an audience member, and this is for Doug. Doug, you're up. So the question is, the school her child is going to, or will be going to, has a downhill to get to the playground. He's still ambulatory, but she's not sure how he's going to get back up this literal hill, grass hill, every day. He likes to play as much as he can, but the hill's going to be too much for him. Any brainstorming ideas about?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know kind of right off the bat. What I would say is if, like, let's say he has a manual wheelchair, I would use that to take it out to the playground. I would rather have the child use his energy and strength to play on the playground than to go all the way out there. And so definitely stairs, ramps, hills are generally tough for kids. Hang on, we don't need that in the background.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, generally ramps and hills and stairs are really tough, and they are very energy expending. So if there's any way, even like a simple wheelchair or something, just to use to get out to the playground area, that would be my kind of, I don't know all the ins and outs of this specific situation, but that's what I would try to do.
Very
Yeah.
good. Does anybody else have, and Heather just said the nurse should have a wheelchair as well that can be used for the school. So that's good to know.
Yeah, I mean, usually a simple manual wheelchair can be found, and then just, store it in the hallway by the playground or outside the classroom and just use it for that.
Does anybody have any other questions? Again, we can continue this conversation on the Family, Friends, and Duchenne group. We have approximately 1,000, but it's specifically the one for educators, therapists, and parents, so we can get together and keep chatting about this. Let's see. All of y'all just might be glazed over and drooling like I feel like I am. So the good news is this was recorded, so you can go back and watch a little bit at a time. And again, I'll be posting it to the YouTube channel. I'll be posting it to the Family, Friends, and Duchenne page, and I'll be, sharing it with all of the groups as well. Gosh, I don't know what else there is to say. Oh, I do know what else to say. We do have some more events coming up. We have, in less than a week on Friday, about kids being teenagers and having a progressive disease. Dr. Siegel has written several books, The Whole Brain Child and Brainstorm, and a bunch of books. He'll be here for us. And then the following week, Doug is going to do the dads just hang out and chat. And we'll have a grief webinar. And then Bridgette's wonderful mom, Sarah McMahan, will be doing a webinar about the mindset of independence from the start. Not just the chairs and the medical durable equipment, but let's talk about the mindset and what we expect, and we can set ourselves up for success that way too. All right, beautiful.
Lindy, can I just give a quick plug for the dads thing?
Oh, please do.
If any of you guys, significant others want to join, it's really low key. It's fantastic. I mean, it gives dads an opportunity to just kind of, like, we don't usually have an agenda. It just gives them an opportunity to express themselves or talk about their fears, or like we had someone on there last time that he didn't talk at all. He just wanted to listen and hear what other people had to say. So it's definitely not intimidating. It's just kind of like a checking in. How's everybody doing? What's going on? What can we support each other with?
Yeah, and I should say as well, it is not recorded. It is not recorded. It is not posted. It's just get there and talk. So again, that's up on the Family, Friends, and Duchenne page. Thank you, Leona. Okay, guys. Well, thank you for spending your Saturday with us. So grateful. And we hope to see you again soon. Bye, guys.
Thank you.